Fun Ideas Productions presents the Fun Ideas Podcast.
If you're unhappy most of the time, and you're indoors when the sun begins to shine, you're bogged down with responsibility. When the good sun shines, you can come out with me.
Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and welcome to Fun Ideas Podcast number 272. How do you do? The purpose of this recording is to introduce you to my new book set called Unconditionally Mad, Part 1 and Part B. First, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Mark D. Arnold, and I am the writer of Unconditionally Mad. It's my job... My name is Mark D. Arnold, and I am the writer of Unconditionally Mad. It's my job to... I am the writer of Unconditionally Mad, and it's my job... What's so funny about that? Well, anyway, here's William M. Gaines, Harvey Kurtzman, Jack Davis, Wally Wood, Bill Elder, Al Feldstein, Norman Mingo, Kelly Freeze, Bob Clark, Frank Jacobs, Don Martin, Don Edwing, Paul Coker, Nick Meglin, Dave Berg, George Woodbridge, Mort Trucker, Al Jaffe, Dick DeBartolo, Sergio Aragones, Angelo Torres, Tom Bunk, John Ficarra, Tom Richmond, Desmond Devlin, Sam Viviano, Johnny Sampson, Bill Morrison, Susie Slab, and many more. And here's the publisher, Bear Manor Media. Available now through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or Bear Manor Media. The Fun Ideas Podcast is brought to you in part by Freaky Magazine. I contribute material to every issue, so give it a try.
Hey kids, have you read Freaky? The magazine of weird humor for freaks like you. Freaky Magazine is a way-out collection of weirdo comics, kooky gags, photo funnies, social satire, and surreal collage. 52 pages of insanity in the tradition of magazines of yore like Cracked, Plop, and Zap. Special offer for Fun Ideas listeners, get a free sample copy in the mail, made of smelly newsprint and smudgy ink the old-fashioned way. Just message your mailing address to theslowpoisoner@gmail.com. That's theslowpoisoner@gmail.com while supplies last.
Friends, have you tried Lee's Comics? Lee's Comics is better than the leading comic book store. Wait a minute. Lee's Comics is the leading comic book store, based on arbitrary standards set by Lee Hester himself.
Lee's Comics was named as one of the 21 best online dealers by popoptique.com. To shop the Lee's Comics eBay store, go to eBay and search for Lee's Comics Inc. That's LEESCOMICSINC, period. Don't forget the period. Mention the Fun Ideas Podcast when you order, and you'll receive a free bonus gift.
Hey, it's Charles Rosenay from the Monkeys Interview Show here on Monkey Mania Radio. So proud to announce the release of a brand new book called Not Just Happy Together, The Turtles from A to Z. That's right, the other band besides our Monkeys who should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, The Turtles, a great new book that's a discography. It's got interviews, it's got reviews, it's got everything you might want to read about. If you're a 60s fan like I am and love the Beatles and the Monkees and the Turtles, Not Just Happy Together has a front cover and a back cover by Henry Diltz, a forward by Gary Puckett, and it's published by Genius Music Books, an imprint of Genius Book Publishing, now available from www.notjust NotJustHappyTogether.com. Hope you pick it up. I know you're going to love it and enjoy all the stuff about the turtles. Thank you for listening to Monkey Mania Radio. Hey, hey.
I'm putting the final touches on Crazy, the magazine that dared to be dumb, and we'll be starting a book on Plop soon. You can still buy my Mad Books, Turtles book, and all my other books. I will be going to England for the first time in August, so I won't be uploading any episodes while I am gone. Please go back to listen to any of the previous episodes of this podcast that you may have missed. On today's show, we have two guests who have written a book about the history of the TV show McHale's Navy, called Set Sail with McHale. Here they are, Denny Reese and Steve Thompson.
Hi, this is Mark Arnold with yet another episode of Fun Ideas Podcast, and today I have two guests with me that are going to talk about their new book about McHale's Navy. What's that, you say? Well, we'll find out in the next hour or so. So we have the two authors. To my right, or to my left, however this works, is Stephen Thompson, and below me is Denny Reese, and they both are co-authors on this book. And I just found out shortly before the show that these two gentlemen have never met each other, yet they worked on a book. So how did you do that?
Well, he actually came to my rescue. I had started this book and was having some difficulty, and he offered to look at it for me. And before long, he jumped right in and became my co-author.
Very cool. Now, how much did you have written prior to Stephen's involvement?
It's hard to say because I was working on a flash drive, and I had some problems with my flash drive, so I actually lost probably a couple of chapters.
Ah.
And it was getting to the point where I was getting frustrated.
Also, when I started editing it, we decided to go in a slightly different direction. So I took out some of what he had already written and asked him to write some additional stuff too. So it ultimately works out as probably about 50-50, maybe 60-40 in my favor. But it's definitely a very real collaboration.
That's cool. Okay. Since I'll try to name names so we're not talking over each other. So, Stephen, I'll ask you, why McHale's Navy? I mean, I'll say my reason first, and then I met Ernest Borgnine years ago when he turned 80, and he was just the nicest, sweetest guy. And I'd known about his movies, and I knew about McHale's Navy, but I never really watched it as a kid. A lot of the black and white shows were gone, except for I Love Lucy. But, I've developed a love for it, and I love Joe Flynn. I never met him. And before you answer, I met Tim Conway before, and I met Carl Ballantyne. Anyway, so why McHale's Navy?
In particular, it's because that's the book that Denny had already started.
Well, okay.
But as a kid, McHale's Navy was one of my favorite shows. My parents watched it all the time. And so you watch what your parents watch when you're a little kid. And I got to see it. And I remember like the last couple seasons of it. I don't really remember the earliest couple seasons. But then in the 70s, it was rerun. And I became obsessed with it for a while. So I watched it all the time. And I just thought it was hilarious. Tim Conway and Joe Flynn together, I think, are two of the funniest guys that ever made a television show. So.
And I'll ask yourself, Denny, you started this all, so
Okay.
What was your interest level? How did you come about doing a McHale's Navy book?
Well, I had written a book on the Gomer Pyle TV series called Gomer Says Hey.
Oh, I have that book. Okay. Should have shown that.
Very well received. And my publisher, I think, is Oliver Publisher, Ben Ulmer, said something about maybe doing another one on the military sitcom. He actually wanted, at one time, I think he still does, wants a biography on Joe Flynn.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's enough to really either do, or you may have to get into some things you may not want to talk about. but I thought, well, let's try McHale's Navy. I say, they made a lot of episodes. So there's got to be enough for a book. And there was. And if you check out our Facebook page, you can see where he maintains it. It's almost like a book in itself. People should check that out. Set Sail with McHale.
Yeah. And Stephen has it in the background. Well, I'll hold it up here. I have a copy here. Set Sail with McHale. And Mad Magazine's Tom Richmond did the cover, if you're wondering who did that wonderful caricature of those guys. And let's see if I can pull it up without disappearing. Sometimes it does because I have a blurred background. Looks like it's okay. So anyway, um,
If I remember correctly,
excuse me.
you in fact were the one who sent me Tom Richmond's artwork when I was posting things about McHale's Navy and working on the book,
Hmm.
and you sent me where he had posted that artwork on his page, and then I contacted him, and he agreed to let us use it for a relatively small fee, actually,
Hmm.
and to go ahead and do the gray tones and everything on it rather than color it,
Hmm.
because he thought that would work better. And honestly, since it was a black and white show, I thought that was perfect.
Yeah.
And then we got Craig Yo to design it. Craig Yo, the former vice president of the Muppets, award-winning designer, Eisner-winning editor and writer, and he designed the cover for us around Tom's artwork. So yeah, we did pretty good with the cover.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, Tom Richmond, he has this regular email called the Ink Stained Wretch, and just for fun, because he loves to do caricatures, he just does random caricatures, and
Mhm.
that's probably what I did. I probably knew you were either writing a book or you're a fan, and I said, "Look at this," you know. It's like,
Yeah.
and that's probably how it started. So that's cool.
Well, I
Yeah,
tell you, the next book I write, I'm going to see if Tom Richmond has any caricatures of it and see if I can license it again, because
very
the
cool.
cover, everybody has raved about the cover. People who probably will never buy the book rave about the cover.
Hmm. And but actually, you should read the book because it is good.
Oh, I agree.
It's a good book. um, so let's see. What's there's so many questions, and then I don't know what to ask. But you I'll ask Denny. So you worked on the Gomer Pyle book. I guess what inspired that? Was it your love of military sitcoms, or what's going on there?
No, I think a couple things really got me going on that was I waited too long on Jim Neighbors. He passed away in November, I think 2017. And I thought, well, maybe I should go ahead and write this book while there may be somebody still around from the series. And there was, Ronnie Shell.
Hmm.
And at that time, Elizabeth McRae was still living. And then MeTV had just started showing Gomer Pyle reruns.
Hmm.
So new generations were discovering it. So I sent Ben an email and just come to find out, he said that was his 4-year-old son's favorite TV show.
Wow.
It was an automatic
Well,
accept.
golly.
And while writing the book, I was able to go to Georgia and meet Ronnie Shell.
Hmm.
And I asked him if he would write the foreword, and he was glad to do it. And we've become friends since then. And
Yeah.
that was the start of it.
That's cool. I met Ronnie Shelley years ago. That's actually where I met Carl Valentine and Tim Conway, who was doing a benefit in San Francisco State, and that's my alma mater. Alma mater. And for about 5 to 10 years, he used to just recruit his friends, which all of them have since passed except for himself, since he's in his 90s now. But he had Merv Griffin, he had Jack Sheldon, he had Harvey Korman, all these different celebrities that he just knew from doing TV shows and everything like that. So I got a chance to talk to him back then. And then years later, I managed to get him on this very podcast. So he was on this podcast and he did talk about Good Morning World and Gomer Pyle and a few other things he's done. And of course, I knew him from Disney movies and things like that. So, which is how I know like a lot of these stars. It's like it's funny. All the three principals actually did a Disney movie at some point. You know?
Oh yeah. Well,
Yeah,
Flynn did what, about eight, nine
something
Disney
like that.
movies, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
And then Conway did at least about 5 or 6, and then
Did it.
at the very least, Ernest Borgnine was in the black hole. So
I'd forgotten about that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I was like, a pseudo reunion. But anyway, um, so the principals that you talked to, what was the most interesting revelation that they came up with about the show? And either can answer.
The principals from McHale's Navy?
Yeah, of the
You
people
didn't
you
talk to
interviewed.
any of them. They were all
Never had a
dead.
chance to
I
talk
thought
to him.
you interviewed a couple. Oh, you were saying that about the Gomer Pyle book. I apologize. Anyway.
Yeah, Denny tried really hard to contact Bobby Wright,
Mhm.
who is still alive. He's the
Yes.
only living member. And he got as far as finding out where he was,
Mhm.
but he never responded to anything. And then Denny did make contact with Gavin McLeod, who called him up, but Gavin basically was ill and
Mm.
dying at that point and knew it. And he said he really was just too ill to participate and died right after that.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, it does happen. I've had that happen to me on some of my books. So yeah, I misunderstood you. I was thinking you were saying it about the McHale's Navy book. Um, let's see what else. Um, Now, are you two like me? I mean, because of liking Gomer Pyle and McHale's Navy, are you fans of like Sergeant Bilko and
oh
any
yeah,
other service comedy, or even like Car
Yes.
54 and everything like that?
Open
sure.
zeros.
Mhm.
Well,
And
Bilko was done by the same people really who did McHale.
mhm,
Towards the end, not Nat Haken, whatever how it's pronounced,
I can, yeah.
left, and Ed Montaigne took over. And Ed Montaigne ultimately became the creator slash showrunner for McHale.
Mhm. So I guess since you didn't interview anybody, in doing your research and maybe scouring other people's interviews with these people, what was the most interesting fact that you found and discovered about the show?
I think the
Hmm.
most interesting actor on the show has to be, as far as his background story, would be Joe Flynn.
Hmm, why is that?
Because, well, basically because he was probably nothing like his character in real life. He was a he was a fighter for actors' rights.
Mhm,
He helped them get some residuals, for their work that they wouldn't be getting today if it wasn't for him.
mhm.
And he died very mysteriously. I don't know.
Yeah,
I think we'll talk about that later on, or you
we
want
can
to go
talk
ahead.
about it now. Yeah.
He died in a swimming pool
Mhm,
around midnight with a cast on his leg. So
hmm.
it's kind of strange. And he'd been drinking. So it's all, none of that really clicks for me why he would be in that pool that time of night in that condition.
Hmm. Do you
Yeah,
think it was? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
he literally had just come home from the cast party for his last Disney movie, The Strongest Man in the World. He drove um, Cesar Romero home, and they tried to talk him out of it because he'd been drinking.
Hmm.
But he said, I'll be okay. And he went ahead and he drove Cesar Romero home. Caesar lived for years, so presumably he got home okay.
Hmm.
But that's the last anybody saw or heard of Joe Flynn until he turned up the next morning around 9 a.m. when his 16-year-old son found him in the pool naked with the cast on his leg, apparently having drowned and possibly having had a heart attack.
Hmm. But
So
you, in your research, you didn't uncover any sort of foul play or anything, did you? Or you don't
there
know?
were
He
conspiracy
had
theories
been
even
robbed.
back then.
Steve can tell you the story. Maybe he knows. He researched it about being robbed in South Carolina
Hmm.
hotel.
What's
Yeah, he was robbed in South Carolina about 2 months before he died. He was in South Carolina to give a speech for the American Cancer Society. He and his wife were staying at a motel, and left about 9 o'clock. He left the office of the motel to go back to his room. But before he got there, these two guys came up to him, forced him into an empty motel room where they tortured him and beat him for 2 hours and ultimately robbed him of $13, his wallet and credit cards, and a $400 watch. They told him not to leave the room for an hour after they finally left. And he said that haven't got out of there right away. I wasn't going to stay in that room any longer. And he went ahead and made the speech the next night. He had a black eye, cut lip, and bruised, but he made the speech and he got good reviews for the speech. But what happened there? We don't know. The two guys were arrested in North Carolina less than a week later. They claimed he voluntarily gave them his watch and his wallet with his credit cards.
Hmm.
Because sure, that kind of thing happens.
Mhm.
Now, supposedly was bisexual. We didn't put too much of that in the book because it's never any proof of it whatsoever. But
No.
supposedly. So it's possible these were two guys. He was out of town, He had something going with these two guys, a little hanky panky, and they robbed him. And he was embarrassed, and so he reported it as what he did. Or it's possible that the studios who weren't happy with the laws that he had just passed about the residuals for the actors sent somebody to rough him up.
Mhm.
Also possible. According to Daryl Morey, who was one of the actors who was in Strongest Man in the World with him, he
Mhm.
was carrying a gun at that point.
Hmm.
So we think he started carrying the gun around that time after the incident in South Carolina. Um, but still, 2 months later, he died. The two guys took a plea deal and got 9 months, is all, because they said, quote, they did not want to go through a jury trial.
Hmm.
So again, pretty mysterious and no idea exactly what happened there. My wife, who used to be a private detective, literally attempted to track down those two guys and see whatever happened to them, see what other kind of reputation they had. They just seemed to have disappeared after they got out of jail.
Interesting. Hmm.
But I will say this: there would be no way. Of course, Steve's just like me. If you're going to write a book, you need to write the best book you can possibly write
Mhm.
and be honest. So I don't think there's any way you can write a book about Joe Flynn, just a book about him, without covering his private life and things he
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
They're not,
Yeah.
acceptable at that time. They weren't.
Yeah. You'd
Hmm.
have to get into a lot of the stuff that we chose not to really play up, at least in our book. We kind
Yeah.
of hint at it, but we don't play it up.
Right. Right.
He would have been
I'm.
gone. He would have been gone 50 years on the 19th of this
Yeah.
month.
I think I posted that on Facebook. Is that he's been gone as long as he was alive because he died at
Yeah.
49 and gone and gone 49 years. Now it's
Yeah.
50. So yeah.
He seemed so much older, though. I mean, back then,
Right.
he in the early episodes, he even put gray in his hair, if you look. And
Oh,
then
I was
it,
wondering about that. I thought maybe it was natural. He might have been
no, no, no.
prematurely
He
gray. Oh,
he
okay.
put it in to make him look a little bit older and have a little more authority. And then he said in one interview that one day he just skipped going by the makeup department and nobody noticed, so he never went again.
Okay.
He wasn't a comedian,
Yeah.
not by choice.
Hmm.
Uh, his first what role he played was it Indestructible Man, Steve?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Science fiction movie. When he came on screen at one of the theaters, everybody burst out laughing. I don't know what they found so funny in him, but
I
I had
know that
Yeah,
movie is kind of a pretty straight role for him.
I
Compared.
question that story, but he told it for years, so
Hmm.
that was his official version of it anyway.
Hmm.
he was also in Desperate Hours with Humphrey Bogart, and I think
Yeah,
does he play? I think he plays a character who gets carjacked, doesn't he?
don't remember.
I
Hmm.
think so.
But he's did a number of very serious roles. He's in a Highway Patrol episode. He's in he's in that one movie that I posted about the other day from the 70s where he plays
Oh
a
yes,
sheriff's deputy. And that's a very serious role, except for the scene where he and the sheriff both get stripped naked and handcuffed to each other and have to walk through the desert in a compromising position. That was pretty funny.
very obscure movie. He also was on Joy Bishop show. We talk about that in the book, and
Yeah.
he was a funny person. He was so funny, in fact, that Joy Bishop fired him.
Hmm.
Yeah, he
Now,
started getting better reviews than Joey did. And he said, as soon as I saw that, I knew I wasn't going to be on that show much longer.
now that voice of his, which is actually hard, you do a pretty good job, Steve.
Yes.
That voice is that's not really his natural speaking voice, was it? It seemed like
Well,
it was
just slightly
affected.
exaggerated, not very
Yeah.
much though.
Okay.
He had that kind of nasal sound to it. He just exaggerated a little bit, and then as Captain Binghamton, of course, he exaggerated a lot.
Right. Wow,
Uh,
wow,
yes,
wow.
but if you hear him in his serious roles, you recognize the voice immediately.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I mean, he doesn't go so overboard. I'm going by Disney movies, of course, like in The Love Bug. He's not so,
Yeah,
much like Dean Higgins in that one. you
right.
know.
And just like Tim Conway, they're both from Ohio,
hmm
and they both, never did really stop going back to Ohio and seeing the people that they knew before they were famous.
Yeah.
Also, they both worked on the Kinley Players
Yes.
circuit, which was through Ohio. Every year, Tim Conway would do it. My dad actually saw Tim Conway in a play in like 1980,
hmm
and I didn't go, and I've always kicked myself for not going with him. Uh, I was 82, actually, sorry. And but Joe Flynn would also come back. He tended to do a play called The Mind with the Dirty Man.
hmm
So,
let me just ask one more thing about Joe Flynn, then I'll talk about the history of the show. Um, do you think you kind of touched on it, is Joe Flynn's death is kind of similar to what happened similarly around the same time for union activity with like Jimmy Hoffa? Was that like kind of in a possibility? I won't say it's definite because people don't know.
well, again, it was one of the conspiracy theories that came out back then. There were a number of them. I remember reading them in the newspapers at the time. Um, we touched on a few in the book, but we didn't again play it up. I think there's a paragraph where we mentioned several of them in one
Yeah.
paragraph, but that's about it.
Okay.
I mean, we just don't know. It's possible he came home, he realized he was a little tipsy, and he figured a quick swim and that'll wake me up, and then I can go to bed. Yeah. Of
hmm
course,
Why
how
did
did he get
he?
his clothes off with his leg band in the cast?
Yeah. Why did he have a cast? What was?
I'm not entirely sure, but if you look in scenes in Strongest Man in the World, he's actually got it in the movie too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just thought it was a prop. I didn't think it was real. I never thought
No,
about it.
it's
Yeah.
in early scenes in the movie, but
Yeah.
not later scenes. But that's because they shot them out of order. The scenes with the cast were some of the last ones shot. So
I think
I
some of
that's
the
where
mean,
he
last
got
work,
some of
work
it.
he ever did was he hosted a game show called It Pays to Be Ignorant,
oh yeah.
which I've never seen.
Yeah.
Oh, there are no episodes of that out there at all, and we tried everything to find that. I've got sources that can find just about any television show that ever aired, and they found nothing for me on that.
But if
Wow.
you want to see Joe Flynn in a role that's completely nothing like any role he's ever played before, you need to catch him in the Insight episode where he plays a talk show host.
hmm
Yeah. And he's playing himself though too. Well, when you
Yes,
say it's nothing like he ever played before, it's
his
the
name,
Joe Flynn show.
although I don't know if it's really supposed to be him or not.
Yeah.
Well, obviously
Interesting.
it's a fictional version of him.
Yes.
But the weird part is it's a show about the very presence of a gun
Mhm.
causing near tragedy. And then of course he started carrying a gun right after that.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay, I'll start with Denny, because you started the book. I know the story because I've, seen it, interviews with Ernest Borgnine and everything like that. But for the benefit of the people watching or listening to this, what was the reason McHale's Navy came about?
Well, I think Ernest Borgnine, they were trying to get him to go into television. And he was a movie star, of course, and he'd won an
Right.
Oscar for Marty and played a lot of bad guys in westerns. And I think what happened was he had turned. He told his agent he had no interest in television whatsoever. He didn't want to leave movies and start making TV shows. But some kid came by his house one day, fundraising for something, Cub Scouts or school project or something,
hmm
and he's going to have some fun with this kid. He told him he was, I think, James Arness, and then later on Richard Boone. And the kid said, "No, you're not neither one of them," because he watched both those
hmm
TV shows. So when he finally told the kid who he really was, the kid never heard of him before. Who's our sport guy? I think he even says in one interview he opened his door and showed him his Oscar. That didn't impress him either. So he calls the agent on the telephone and says, "If that TV show is still open, I'll take it."
Yeah, Now, again, you have to question exactly how true that is. Borgnine told it for years in
Yes.
interviews. We
Yeah.
found him telling it in the early 60s and in the 90s even.
Yeah.
But he was also, if you look at IMDb, doing a lot of television already. He
Yeah.
was on all the anthology shows like Zane Grey Theater and Four Star Playhouse and things like that. So, it's a little bit different than saying, "Oh, I wouldn't do television."
Yeah.
I think it makes a really good story. Anyway,
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a
he
great
was a
story.
storyteller. Yeah.
And there must be some truth to it because he told it for so long. But I think
Yeah.
it became a better story as time went on.
Yeah. I think
Ernest
the
Borgnine,
version. Oh,
he rarely turned the role down. I don't think you know,
Oh,
that's
after that, yeah,
about
he
him.
rarely turned anything down.
So why would he turn down McHale's name?
yeah. Well,
And also
the
keep in
oh,
mind that he wasn't being cast for McHale's Navy. He was being cast for Seven Against the Sea,
Yes.
which was no different than any other of the anthology things that he'd already
I don't
done.
think at one time they weren't even considered for a series at that time.
Yeah.
Just one shot. So yeah, his story doesn't quite pan out. And like I said, over the years, it's become the story he told, and it's a good story. So
yeah.
When the legend becomes the truth, print the legend.
Right. Now, the version I heard was pretty much the same, but it never said that he didn't want to be in television. It was by this point the story had evolved to where he said he did. Basically, because the kid didn't know who he was, and the kid recognized other TV stars that were on this at the same time, and so
yeah.
he was kind of jealous of that instant recognition by a kid,
Well,
and
we had the story in the book, and the version we use is the one that he told it. He's been interviewed for the Television Academy archives, which is where
Mhm,
you can find a lot of great interviews with stars.
mhm.
The official story.
Right.
So
And then how did some of the various cast members get involved? I know obviously we said the Bilko connection, so Tinker Bell, I forgot the actor's name. Obviously he was on both shows. So describe how the various cast members got added to the cast.
you want to start,
Well,
Steve?
Yeah,
okay,
go ahead.
supposedly Ed Montaigne was actually back in New York and he saw Billy Sands somewhere and he told him, I said, I need you to come out to California. I'm doing another military comedy. And he wasn't getting a lot of work at that point. So he did. Now, the two of them apparently were close off screen anyway, because Billy Sands went ahead and became a co-producer with Ed Montaigne on Don Knotts movies later on.
Hmm.
So that's how he got involved with it. The uh, Tim Conway had done 4 episodes, I think, of the new Steve Allen show, they called
Hmm.
it. And he was still Tom Conway then.
Yeah.
And then he went back to Cleveland and he figured, oh, he's just going to stay in Cleveland. That's where he belongs. He's not a big star. And Ernie Anderson, his partner, told him and says, no, you're fired. Get back to Hollywood. You need to go to Hollywood. I'm firing you from this show. And so he did. And then I forget exactly where Montaigne saw him, but that's what changed the whole direction of the show is when they got Tim involved. Originally, Carl Ballantine was announced as like the number 2 star on the show.
Hmm.
It was Borgnine and Ballantine. And then once Tim got involved, and it became a much sillier comedy than they were planning, even when it was going to be a comedy.
Hmm.
Edson Stroll, I think, was the Universal contract player at the time.
Hmm.
Gavin MacLeod is one of those people that was doing everything at the time, which is part of the problem with what happened with Gavin MacLeod. He felt he just disappeared into that role, which wasn't really a role, and therefore his career disappeared with it. He even said later on that when he started doing other things, people said, "Where have you been?" Because they had no idea that he'd been working regularly on McHale.
Hmm.
Who else is there?
Well,
Yoshio
basically,
Yoda had
Wow.
only done one film,
Hmm.
and he basically auditioned for it and got that part. And then again, Flynn, they were originally looking for something along the lines of the Colonel in Bilko for that role. Supposedly, Edward Andrews, who went on to play that role on Broadside, had turned it down at first, and then they wanted what was the other guy's name?
Philip Ober.
Vivian Vance's husband.
Philip Ober.
Yeah. Supposedly they wanted him at one point, and he ended up playing a admiral, I think, on one episode of it. But he turned it down as well. And then when Flynn came in again, it's like, let's change up everything again and go with an entirely different take on that role.
Mhm. One you haven't mentioned is Bob Hastings. I know he was Archie on the
Oh
radio, but
yeah.
that's pretty much that's pretty much what I know pre McHale. But you could talk about
Well,
him more.
Bob Hastings is actually the one that I knew personally. Uh, I worked with Bob for 24 years at the
Wow.
Cincinnati Old Time Radio Convention. I got to act opposite him. I got to watch him act, and I learned more about acting from watching and sitting next to Bob than I did in an entire year of acting class out of high school. Uh, he was just amazing. He was one of those actors, there was no small parts. He gave
Mhm.
his all to every part he ever did.
Mhm.
If you notice in McHale's Navy, he's always moving.
Yes.
He's always twitching. He steals every scene effortlessly without even trying. If he's in it, your eyes go to him
Right.
because he's making faces and everything back there in character every time.
Hmm.
I have no idea how he got the role actually,
Hmm.
but it was meant to be a one episode role. He wasn't in the first episode. He wasn't in the second two or three episodes, but they showed them out of order. So he does turn up in the second episode that was shown.
Hmm.
And ultimately, they worked that to the point where he was in all but about half a dozen episodes of the
Hmm.
entire series, plus both movies. He was also used as the official greeter for the Universal tour because Universal had the famous tour that would go through the lot with a tram, and they would always send Hastings out to meet everybody and pose for pictures and all that. Sometimes the other characters, the other actors would come out too, always in costume, but Hastings was literally hired to do that, and he loved it. He told me that was one of his favorite parts of it. Um, so I never specifically interviewed him about the show, but I mean, we did talk about it over the years. I only saw him 2 days a year for 24 years, but I did see him and talk to him about that and Batman and things like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, so yeah, he was a really cool guy, and was very happy to have gotten to know him and work with him.
Hmm. It's funny you say that because when I used to watch it as a kid, I was always a Carol Burnett show fan. So I was just and Joe Flynn fan from the Disney movies. So I was just watching Joe and Tim. But
Mhm.
in recent times, thanks to the complete series set,
Mhm.
I started watching the episodes, paying attention to all the other players. And yeah, Bob Hastings, he just does these,
Mhm. Yep.
just these little reactions to anything Joe Flynn does. Anything he
Mhm.
throws at him, he's like, ah, and he goes,
Oh,
really?
he was absolutely the
I can't
best.
even do it.
He was absolutely the best brown noser character in the history of television. No question. And again, in real life, he wasn't like that. I mean, he was never typecast in that role. He did all kinds of things. He did villain roles, he did uh, reporters, detectives, all this kind of stuff. He's the guy in the Poseidon Adventure that is literally counting down to midnight just before the ship gets, turned over. It
Wow.
gets down to zero. It's midnight and the ball falls, and then all hell breaks loose.
Right.
And then you never see him again because he gets killed. And he's not in a single scene with Ernest Borgnine, who's also in the movie.
Yeah.
So,
Interesting. Yeah. It's interesting that's also on a boat, as it were, so
yeah,
uh
exactly. Well,
um
Borgnine reunited with Gavin MacLeod years later. He did a two-part episode of Love Boat, where he plays an Italian guy. It's one that they shot in Italy. So obviously there was no hard feelings between Gavin and Borgnine. Gavin, in his autobiography, mentions that one of the directors was not a nice guy, let's just say, and he doesn't give a name, but nearly all the episodes he did were directed by one guy. So Sidney Landfield is probably the guy he's talking about.
yeah.
So,
And one ironic thing about Joe Flynn is, uh, just think how many episodes where he winds up in the drink and
oh
in water,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
in the way he died by
Mhm.
drowning.
Yeah.
Now, wasn't he a good swimmer normally? I've heard that.
I would say he was. I
Yeah,
don't know that for a fact.
yeah. But I have heard that before. I mean, not like Olympic level, but at least he was able to swim. So it wasn't like he fell in the pool and he was deathly afraid of being in water and
Oh,
suddenly died that way or something.
Right. Yeah.
Um, let's see. I guess the decision to do the show in black and white was basically because TV was still pretty much in black and white in 1962,
there
correct?
weren't very
Well,
many
also
characters.
you had that big a cast. They couldn't afford color. They had to pay all
Right.
those people in the cast too.
Hmm. But near the end, by the time they went to the last season, they could have switched to color, but it was at the same cost cutting that
Yeah.
other than the movies, they wanted to keep it all in black and white.
Yep. Literally, the color for the movies was one of the biggest selling points of the movies. If
Hmm.
you look at the ads for it, they always in color. You'll
Yeah.
never see this on television. Things like that.
Hmm.
And they did the same thing around the same time with they made a feature film of the Munsters.
Oh yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Munster went home, and no one had ever seen the Munsters in color before.
Hmm.
And they look terrible in color. It looked better in black and white.
Yes, actually,
But you also, I have had so many people tell me that there were some episodes of McHale's Navy made in color, and there weren't.
Hmm.
So I think what happened was at some point somebody colorized some episodes of it and
probably.
aired those probably back in the 80s when colorizing was all the big deal and not very well done.
Hmm.
These days, if you have something that's not particularly made for, beautiful, exquisite photography and you colorize it, it can be pretty good.
Mhm.
They colorized the first season of I Dream of Jeannie,
Mhm.
and the only the funny part of that, if I can digress for a second, is I have the complete set of that on DVD, and it
Mhm.
has commentary from Larry Hagman and Barbara Eden and Bill Daly for that first episode, and they're talking about the Jeannie wearing the green outfit that she had, and yet they colorized it as the pink outfit that she
Right.
wore in later episodes.
That's
So it's
funny.
hilarious. So unintentionally.
Yeah.
Had McHale's Navy gone one more season, it would have been in color because that was the year that everything
Oh
went
yeah.
Mhm.
1966.
Yeah. Um, is there a possibility? I don't know this, but I mean, since the feature films were roughly the equivalent of like 3 episodes, would they have chopped that up and put it in the syndication package or no?
I
I
don't
don't think
think
so.
so.
Okay.
The way they're paced, they're not really paced like individual episodes.
Right. Yeah. One thing I didn't remember is, I'd seen both the films just randomly on TV over the years and didn't think about it. But I always thought the two films were made after the series was done. I didn't realize the first one came out between season 2 and 3. The second
Yeah.
one came out between season 3 and 4. I mean, and then you mentioned something in the book about Joe Flynn saying in an interview or something, yeah, we could keep on doing this for years.
Yeah.
Um, was that a possibility or is he just talking through his hat?
I think it was a possibility, but the second one didn't perform as well as the first one. So they figured diminishing returns, let's just write it off.
Okay.
But I do think it was a possibility at the time.
Mhm.
So
I mean, Ernest
I thought,
Borgnine was not in the second film.
Right.
That might have had something to do with it. I don't know.
Mhm. Now, by that point, was Ernest or any of them really tired of doing it? It sounded like Joe Flynn still liked doing it, or Tim
well,
as well.
Borgnine was on record as wanting to go back to feature films at that point.
Okay.
But at the same time, one of the reasons that they switched to Italy was supposedly because of his Italian background, because
Hmm.
his mother was an Italian countess. And they wanted to, give him something different. So he gets to play like his Italian cousin in 2 episodes,
Right.
who gets to speak a lot of Italian because he was very fluent in Italian because he was raised partially in Italy.
Hmm.
And so that was one of the reasons that they switched, other than the budget. That was shot on the Frankenstein village from Ghost of Frankenstein,
Hmm.
and uh, but I don't think he would have stayed even if it lasted another year. I don't think he would have done any more of the movies, even if they'd done more movies.
Right. Is there a reason why they cast Borgnine as, I guess, would he be considered Scottish or Irish or something, rather than just making an Italian commander?
Could not find anything on that, but it is one of the questions everybody seems to want to know.
Yeah. I mean, as a kid, it never, crossed my mind. But later, I'm going, he's an Italian. His name's McHale.
Yeah.
He also told a story that he thought that they got the idea from an old movie, Richard Whitmark movie called Destination Gobi,
Mhm.
because the Commander McHale, but that's the only connection we found. We can't find any proof of that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Commander McHale is the name of the character in the movie. Uh, and he's the commander of a group of Navy scientists in a desert riding camels. So not really similar at all. I think it's just pure coincidence.
Hmm. Okay. Now, a few years after the series, and I forgot if you discussed this in the book or not. You probably did, but not extensively. Joe Flynn and Tim Conway did another sitcom, which I've only seen like one episode, and it was a black and white print, but I know it was in color. I forgot the name of the series, so if you can remember it.
The Tim Conway Show.
Oh, what's it called? The Tim Conway Show.
Yes,
Okay. Well, didn't he do the Tim Conway Show like 4 times? I don't know.
he did. Yes.
Anyway, okay.
Flynn actually did an interview when it came on and says, I don't know why they called it the Tim Conway Show. I was late for a meeting, and when I came in, they told me that's what it was going to be called. I was hoping it'd be called the Joe Flynn Show.
Um, was any McHale involvement in that? I don't mean Ernest Borgnine, but I mean anybody
I,
behind the scenes.
I think there were a couple of episodes written by some of the writers from
Okay.
McHale's Navy. Um, there's only like 4 episodes, I think, that are available to watch right now. I've got about 4.
Hmm.
Um, and they're all the black and white prints. It's
Right.
not a bad show. I mean, it comes across pretty well because they still have that chemistry.
Yeah.
Uh, it might be a little too much of their chemistry. It might be a case of, you know, too much of a good thing is still too much, you know?
Yeah.
I
Uh,
remember watching it when it first aired, and I don't see how they could have kept it going very long.
yeah, exactly. It's not the kind of thing. Oh, I was reading the other day something about it that we don't have in the book. The plane that they used for it was actually still in use by a company, the company that they were leasing it from, and they had bullet holes painted on it to make it look like it had been through a lot. And the guys who owned the plane tried to lease the plane to somebody for something, and they saw the bullet holes painted on there, and they said, no, they don't want anything to do with it. So they were getting mad that they were losing business because of the show.
Um, it is interesting that both Tim and Joe kind of went on into Disney movies after that, but they never worked together again, did they?
No,
Okay.
neither of them were
Yeah.
ever in the same film again.
Yeah.
They were great friends in real life. Supposedly they went to the races sometimes and things like that, but never worked together again.
Of course, Tim
Flynn,
Conway has a reputation of being in, you know, TV series, none of them ever making it.
Yeah.
mhm.
Let's name
And
them
Flynn had
all. Tim Conway Show, Tim Conway Show,
well,
no,
don't
new
forget
Kim,
Rango.
new Tim Conway Show.
Actually, Rango was actually a pretty good series, I think.
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
I've
I
seen a
like
few of those.
Rango.
Yeah, yeah.
But Tim Conway, and I think Tim Conway's a very funny man, but a little bit of Tim Conway probably goes a long way for some people.
Well, there's certain actors that I think work best as support.
Yeah.
Tim Conway on the Carol Burnett show is not the main character. That's why people always remember him from Carol Burnett show. Tim Conway on McHale, same thing. But the Tim Conway show, he's got to carry the burden, and he's not the kind of guy that can do that. Paul Lynde was a similar actor. He's great as a guest star. Everybody loves him. Every time they tried to give him his own show, it didn't work.
Yeah.
But
Interesting.
you were talking about people working together again. Uh, Tim and Borgnine worked together again on SpongeBob,
I knew you were gonna say
and
that.
Ballantyne worked with Joe Flynn on a couple of different things, including an episode of Love American Style I can think of right offhand, and not a lot of other combinations that did. Edson Stroll didn't really do too much acting after that. He did a couple of things, and then he turned up in a music video in the 90s, I think.
Mhm.
Um, and that's about it.
Didn't he
And
appear in one of the Three Stooges features or something like that?
mhm.
Which
He
one
was
was?
Oh,
uh,
right. Three.
Snow White and the
Yeah.
Three Stooges. Yeah, that's right. Okay, I just want to make sure I know my Three Stooges, but sometimes I mix up the roles, so I don't want to say it. Um,
Yeah,
and did anybody else ever appear on the Love Boat besides Borgnine, to your knowledge?
I don't think so. I don't think Conway ever even did.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Um, yeah. Uh,
Probably some of the guest stars
Yeah.
in Cats Navy did.
Billy Sands mostly worked behind the scenes.
Mhm.
He was even an announcer on one show.
Yeah.
Um, and Edson Stroll, like I said, kind of got out of the business. Flynn died young. Borgnine mostly did movies. He kept trying to do TV series, so he did a whole bunch of pilots, and
Mhm.
none of them sold. And then he would end up in things like Airwolf,
Yeah.
where he's the best part of Airwolf, but Airwolf is like the most 80s show ever if you watch it. It's got the 80s
Oh,
music, the 80s feel, and even the 80s helicopter. If you remember, there was like Blue Thunder and all these other 80s helicopter movies.
right.
Uh, so Borgnine was the best part of it, but it still wasn't a very good show.
Mhm.
Um, and he just was never able really to get much else going. I think he did a another animation show where he did a lot of episodes of it, but I can't remember. And I totally missed for the book, and I don't think we mentioned it. On SpongeBob, he plays Mermaid Man,
Right.
as in Merman, as in Ethel Merman.
I was
Totally
actually
missed
gonna
that.
I was gonna actually ask you about that. Thank you for reminding me, even though you weren't intentionally doing this.
I
So
wasn't intentionally doing it. Yeah,
he was infamously married to her for I don't know so many days
like 36
during the
days
course
or
of
something.
McHale's Navy.
Yep.
Um, if he had any ill feelings, he certainly kind of hid it at least initially. But when I'm watching the series, I'm watching the fourth season once now. It seems like as time goes on, he gets a little more grumpy. I'm wondering if it's the series or the aftermath of Ethel Merman.
Well, he got married fairly soon after that. He married Donna Rancourt, who
Oh, okay.
had been a playing a nurse on McHale's Navy. She was never credited
Mhm.
except in a newspaper clipping where it had a picture of her with Tim Conway. But he had known her even before he met Ethel. And whether there was anything going on originally between them, I don't know. But almost as soon as he divorced Ethel, he married her.
Hmm.
But eventually, they got divorced, and she claimed he hired a hitman to murder her. Now, we
Wow.
couldn't find any more information on that, so that's not in the book either.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's like, what? More?
Well, he, at that point too, he wasn't getting along with Ed Montaigne, the
Oh,
producer,
yeah.
and he even had a feud with Joe Flynn. We don't know exactly what that was all.
Hmm.
Yeah, Bob Hastings told me at one of the conventions that for almost a full season, Flynn and Borgnine weren't speaking to each other, and he had to act as the go-between when they weren't in character.
Hmm.
And he said he got tired of it and eventually told them to work it out among themselves, and they
Hmm.
did, and they got, they were better. In one newspaper interview, um, Flynn mentions it, and he said, I'd say something about it, but then people would say, there he goes again. So I'm not gonna, even bring it up. Things are better now. But again, couldn't figure out exactly what the problem was. And at the time that Hastings was telling me all this, I wasn't writing a book. So I didn't make a point of memorizing it though. There's
Right.
one episode with an alligator,
Hmm.
and if I remember correctly, that alligator had something to do with the initial argument that they had.
Hmm.
But that's all I remember about it.
Oh well. Now
I know I wish I'd recorded all this stuff,
I
but who
know
knew you were going
in
to need it, you
retrospect, you go, you talked to him forever, but oh well.
know?
Hey, at least you got to be friends with them. I'll say that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I was asking a friend of mine named Greg, who goes to radio conventions. I've gone to a few, but when I, started watching Bob on these shows, I said, "Did you ever meet Bob Hastings?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, a few times at Spurdvac." And I go,
Yeah.
"Ah," but I missed out because I went to Spurdvac after he'd passed, or you
He
know.
was probably the most prolific guest at the radio conventions.
Mhm.
Because I know, like I said, he did ours every year that he could. Out of
Mhm.
28, I think, years that we had our convention, he was there 24 of them.
Oh wow. Okay.
Do they
And they
still have
usually
those?
held it on his birthday weekend.
Hmm.
So he would literally come here for his birthday and, leave his friends and family at home and everything. So,
Do they still have those conventions anywhere that you know of?
yeah, they still have Spurtback, and I think another one out west, but all the ones on the East Coast, the big one was in Newark, and then the Cincinnati one they all went away about
Yeah.
10 years ago.
Yeah. The other one up here is Reps. I'm in
Yeah,
Oregon, and
reps.
it's up in Washington. I've gone a few times.
I worked
I
in
think
local radio for 10 years, and one thing we did was we recreated the old time radio plays, but we wrote original scripts.
Yeah.
We
mhm.
did the style of the old time radio shows.
Hmm.
A lot of
We
fun.
had a group one time locally called Gracie, the Golden Radio Association of Cincinnati Imaginative Entertainment.
Yeah.
And we took recreated scripts all around town and performed them at various events and everything. And nobody cared. Nobody cared at all. We did one at a bowling tournament, uh, trophy ceremony thing, dinner, and nobody cared. And they're laughing at all the wrong things. They're talking among themselves. We've got the microphones, we've got the sound effects things. We did sound effects. We did gunshots by putting balloons tightly in a box and then taking one of those paddle ball things with a nail driven through it and banging the balloons.
Oh,
And
cool.
that was how we did gunshots.
Hmm.
We didn't know how they do it back then.
Right.
So I made that up and we did that. But I mean, we did that for a year. We did it probably half a dozen times and nobody cared. And
Hmm.
then we did it at the old time radio convention and we got applause. So after that, we gave up the group and just, I would do the recreations at the radio convention. I got to be Jughead twice opposite Bob as
Oh, that's
Archie.
cool. Yeah.
And eventually they brought in the original Jughead. And he and I ended up in the lobby of the hotel one time doing what we called dueling Jugheads. We would just ad lib for about 15 minutes. Yeah, for about 15 minutes, we would ad lib back and forth, sniping at each other as Jughead. And he
Wow.
always called me Jughead after that, even though he played Jughead. I think it's because he had trouble remembering names, but that was great.
Yeah.
That was fun.
And both Spurtback and Reps, yeah, they've done original scripts and recreations, so it depends. The last time I was at Spurtback, which is probably 7 or 8 years ago or something, Chuck McCann was still alive and he was out there, and he he went off script, and everybody else got really annoyed. He was starting to ad lib left and and so um since they started yelling at him, he started yelling back, and ooh, when he was not getting his way, he had a temper. So I was like, wow. So
I did one time. I was doing a Aldrich family with Ezra Stone, who played Henry Aldrich in the originals, and he started ad libbing, and I kept feeding him the lines to get him back to the script. And afterwards, somebody told me you should have ran with it. He did 25 minutes off script in Newark last year.
so he's
But I thought
notorious
my
for that.
job was
Okay.
to get him back to the script, so I
Right,
kept
right,
trying to
right.
feed him the cues.
um Back to the book, of course. So I'm reading, or what I'm reading. Well, I'm reading too. I read the book, but I'm watching the
Thank you.
episodes. And well, first I'll say, Stephen, I emailed you at some point before I had gotten through the episodes. I said, is it just me, or is the first season a little bit sluggish? And then the second season kind of picks up. And then I was in the second season, and then you responded back, yeah, the first season's a little slow. And then second, third kind of picks up. And then the fourth season, a lot of people don't acknowledge its existence. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you want to elaborate on that?
People just thought that the first three in the South Pacific made sense.
Yeah.
Whereas, why do you put a Navy crew in the middle of an Italian village, freshly liberated? And where'd the nurses go? Did they
Mhm.
stay back on the island? All you brought was the captain's sidekick, and McHale and his crew. Nobody else. Why? Made no
Fuji,
sense.
Don't forget Fuji.
Go ahead.
And Fuji, yeah.
Fuji, yeah. um, let's see, but you did add a couple characters. I know there's like Jay Novello in a lot of the fourth season episodes. Can you talk a little bit about
Jay
him?
Novello is in there and disappears after a certain point,
Oh,
and
okay.
suddenly you've got what's his name? The guy who played his sidekick. What's his name? Mr. Whipple from the Charmin commercials.
Yeah, Dick Wilson.
Dick Wilson. Suddenly, Dick Wilson, as the assistant mayor, is getting the lines that seem to go that they should have gone to Novello.
Hmm.
So all I can figure is it was a situation like Parley Bear once told me that he would have loved to have played the mayor on the Andy Griffith Show for the rest of its run, but he only had appeared in like every third episode, and he had to pay his bills,
Mhm.
so he had to quit. And I'm thinking it may be that way with Jay Novello. He had to pay his bills, and he wasn't in every episode.
Hmm.
Whereas Dick Wilson was in so many other shows. I mean, he was the drunk on
Yeah.
Bewitched and all that, even
Mhm.
before he got the Charmin commercials.
Mhm.
That he probably didn't have as much of an issue with it.
Okay. I guess I haven't got to those episodes. I'm about halfway through the fourth season, and I figured, well, I've seen all the good stuff, according to you. So I will
Well,
finish the
there's good
series. Yeah.
stuff in the fourth season too. I
Yeah.
mean, Jay Novello, like you say, he's a marvelous character actor. I love
Mhm.
seeing him in things.
Mhm.
But at the same time, do we need another con man character when we've already got a con man character
Mhm.
on the show? And Valentine gets less to do in the
Right.
fourth season because of that.
Yeah.
I don't know how everybody else feels, but I kind of like Henry Beckman's character in the fourth
Oh
season.
yeah, he was
It's good
great
to have
too.
somebody who kind of reins in on Binghamton.
Hmm.
And Henry Beckman was another one who was a scene chewer usually. So in this, he's actually very restrained, which is unusual for him because he was a serious scene chewer in Peyton Place. And then my favorite, Here Come the Brides, where he was the captain in that.
Hmm.
And seriously, he was with the best of them. He could chew the scenery.
Hmm. Well, another person we haven't talked about, and he's only in every so often, he's not a regular, is the Admiral. You know, what's the actor's name? I can't think of his
Roy
name.
Roberts.
Will
Yes.
Roberts.
Yeah.
So,
And
There's only one. They kept switching admirals. I don't know why they didn't just stick with him because he was really a good admiral, I thought.
mhm.
yeah, the first season they had one guy for about 8 or 9 episodes, I think. And then and again, it's probably one of those cases where he can't just sit around waiting for McHale to call. So they would have to get another actor if he wasn't available. Um, so they ended up having, I think it was like 13 different admirals. I wrote in the book how many admirals were in this Navy
Right.
anyway. Um, but they had about 13 different admirals, and they all acted like they knew all of the McHale people and all that, even though you'd never seen them before. But after the first guy left, you got Roy Roberts, and he became the main one for the
Yeah.
next 3 seasons, or
Mhm.
next 2 seasons after that. He's mainly in season 2 and 3, and then you don't see him again in season 4 either.
Right.
In fact, all the admirals disappeared because they don't want to go to where, this Italian village. Makes no sense.
Yeah. Was
But
there any?
Robertson's a great actor. He always played military guys or bank presidents. I mean, he was the bank president on Beverly Hillbillies. He was the bank president on The Lucy Show.
Mhm.
Uh, and when he wasn't a bank president, he's always wearing a military uniform with a cap and everything.
Right.
And
No.
his last
Oh.
movie was The Strongest Man in the World with Joe Flynn.
Oh yeah, that's right. You said that in the book. Yeah. And I will say here, Strongest Man in the World is my favorite Disney movie of the live action stuff during that
Well, if
period,
you notice, Kurt Russell disappears for half the movie.
Yeah.
I honestly think, and Mike McGreevy did not agree with me on this, but I honestly think that they were trying to see what it would be like if Flynn could carry the movie, and then they would go forward with new students because clearly Kurt was getting a little bit long in the tooth to
Yeah.
be a high school or a college student at this point, even. And I thought they would come back with, Medfield, but with new students later on had Flynn lived. But Mike says he never heard anything about that,
Hmm.
so he doesn't think that's what they were thinking.
I was thinking Russell was just bored with the whole thing because he had a contract with Disney for 10 years, and I think
Yeah,
that is his last film. So, and then he
Yeah.
comes back a few years later with things like Used Cars and Escape from New
oh,
York and things like that that
you
are decidedly more adult than what he was doing at Disney. Yeah.
Used Cars was the film that I saw on my first grown-up date, and I described it as a dirty Disney film because it plays like a
Yeah.
Disney film,
Yeah.
except for the topless scenes and the language.
Yeah. But we digress. Anyway, um, I will ask you this, and I'll reveal mine first because he actually was nice enough to put a picture of it in here. Of the 3.5 seasons I've watched, and I watched 2 movies, I have concluded that this is probably my favorite episode, and it might just be for the reasons shown in this picture, which is, if I can show it here, the Don Post
Ah, yes,
mess. Yeah. Oops, there we go.
yeah.
Now, that isn't just a gimmick as much as it's actually a pretty funny episode.
Hmm.
And so far I consider that my favorite. So we'll start with Denny because he hasn't talked for a bit. um, if you have a favorite episode or episodes, what are they?
I don't know if I can single one out, but I mean, I think the ones where Joe Flynn and Bob Hastings get to shine.
Mhm.
What was the one? There was the one about the. I think it was very early on. I think it was probably written by Joseph Heller from Catch 22 fame, where the PT 73 disappears.
Hmm.
Very funny, I thought.
One of our PT boats is missing.
Hmm.
And the one where Joe Flynn and Tim Conway get drunk.
Oh yeah,
They're drinking
that
from
was
the
pretty good.
lagoon. Yeah, it's very funny. Is that the same one where they make him believe he's aged overnight, or is that a different episode?
Don't know.
That was a very funny episode too, where they make him think he wakes up and he's got a long white beard and he's aged 20 years overnight.
Hmm.
Of course, then there were the ones where a couple of them, I think, where they try to make him believe the war is over.
Yeah.
Oh, those are two of my favorites. Yeah,
It's
but that's
when
another example, though.
Carpenter actually gets a chance to tell Binghamton off before he finds out that he better go back to being his yes man again. Go ahead, Steve. What's your
No, I was just going to say that's another example of a sitcom that maybe has overstayed its welcome. The fourth season, they're redoing some of the plots from the earlier ones
uh-huh.
because, like you said, that was the second time they had done that one where they're trying to convince them the war is over. And I think the second version was better than the first one. But at the same time, they did some of the same gags in it too.
Well, that was the one where they try to make him think they were in a restaurant back in New York City.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That was a very funny episode, I thought. Yeah.
Mhm.
I like the one where they spoofed the James Bond films.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
I remember that. Yeah.
that was good. Um, it's hard to pick one,
Yeah.
especially since having just watched them all together. Since you're watching them now, you understand they run
Yeah.
together after a
They
while.
do. I mean, it's not a great show to binge watch sometimes because
Exactly.
it just becomes a big blur. And I go, "Oh, okay, this is the one where Parker is part of royalty or something like that, I think." But now
Yeah.
they're doing this, and it's like, wait a minute, and you get confused, about which
Yeah,
one's
it
which.
really doesn't lend itself to binging very well. That's one of the reasons the book took so long to write, even after I got involved with it,
Hmm.
was because I insisted on watching all the episodes. And at the same time, it wasn't the easiest thing to do,
Yeah,
just to spend an entire day watching 14 episodes or whatever in 7 hours.
right. Well, even this set, I mean, it's like you got 4 times 5 is 21 discs, I think, because
Yeah.
there's 5 discs per season, and then you got the 2 movies on a single disc, and so yeah.
Well, I have the DVDs, but I was actually watching it on YouTube because that way I could stop and start faster and
Oh,
go
I
back
see.
and forth and check things. Um, So I think I only watched like the first season on the DVDs. First season has that marvelous reunion as one of the extras where it
Oh yeah,
has all of the surviving cast members. And that was after I knew Bob. So Bob told me that was going to be on there after he had done it. So I had to go out and buy that. That was great.
that's cool. Um, one thing that confused me as a kid when I saw it originally, and we're talking early 70s, I never saw them when they originally aired. I was born after the series had gone off the air in December of 66.
You're
Um,
lost.
well, I mean, at least they're saved in posterity in film. But the title credits when I was a little kid kind of confused me
Mhm.
because now maybe you can explain it to me. It still kind of confuses me at age 57. So it's like you see the PT boat going kind of at a brisk pace with this kind of slender guy steering it, and then you cut to Borgnine, who's this kind of fat guy, turning it
Yeah.
around, and it's not moving at all. And it's like, is that supposed to be the same guy? It never really quite made sense on what's happening on the opening credits of the show.
It's like the opening of Gilligan's Island, where you have 8 people clearly visible on the ship as it sets out to sea. And it's like, who are those 8 people? There's only 7.
Right. They ate the
So,
other
and none of them look
one.
familiar.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
and what we tried to figure out was what the flags meant, because, in the Navy, flags all have a meaning. And they have the flags that run up at the beginning of every episode.
Right.
And as near as we can tell, they didn't actually mean anything. They just randomly did it. I think somebody who had no idea what it meant just ran them up like that. So,
Okay. Um, one thing I noticed is the earlier episodes are produced by Review, uh,
mhm.
and then
Studios.
later it just says Universal City or something like that. Was that just
Yeah,
a offshoot of Review, and it just morphed into that when MCA took over or whatever? Is
yeah. It's
basically what's
exactly what it was. Yeah.
okay.
It,
All right.
in fact, it is so hard to track down technically who has the rights to McHale now. The 1997 movie doesn't even have a McHale's Navy copyright for or trademark listing or
Hmm.
anything for it. And that's the most recent, thing that's been done with it. And somebody still has it. So in the book, we had to put something along the lines of trademark and copyright to respective to Review Productions, Universal, and their respective whoever owns it now.
Right.
So
And I think about the only place you can really see it on television is on antenna TV. It's just not really seen very much.
Hmm.
yeah,
Is it would the owners be then NBC Universal then at this point?
I don't think so.
Oh,
Well, yeah, because NBC is Universal at this point, isn't it? I
yeah.
don't know. Again, we've kind of lost track because does it wasn't really Universal per se. It was shot at Universal, but it was Review Studios
Right.
originally that did it. So the corporate mergers and everything being what they are, it's all so incestuous that you don't know who ends up owning what. It's
That's
it's
true.
like in the book industry, um, all the different publishers buy each other, and eventually they become the same publisher.
Hmm.
And then new publishers come along and they buy the original publisher. It's weird.
Right. I get
So,
it.
but one of the
Yeah.
reasons I think that McHale's Navy is not on as often as Denny said, it's only on antenna stations, is that it is perceived as racist. And you can't deny that there's a certain amount of casual racism, as we call it nowadays, in the show. But they do not mention the J word. I
Hmm.
think twice they mentioned the J word.
Yeah.
Granted, they mentioned the N word quite a bit.
Yeah.
Not that N word, the
Yeah.
other
The
N
other
word.
N word, yes.
Yeah. Uh, but for the most part, I mean, they don't show the outlandish propaganda stereotypes like they had in the comic books or anything for the Japanese people,
Yeah.
because the Japanese people were our great close friends by 1962.
Yeah.
So they went out of their way not to offend them. But if you're telling a story set in World War II, there is literally no denying that the Japanese were part of the Axis,
Right.
not the Allies.
Yeah.
But I think that is overall the main reason why it's not shown as much. It
Yeah.
is not really that racist. And I say that as a absolute white guy
Yeah.
who, has no right to say that. But
Right.
just from my own, watching it and everything, they've gone out of their way not to be racist. They are of their time.
Right.
And that is bad enough that it doesn't get shown as often nowadays. But
Yeah.
it doesn't get not shown
Right.
because it's classic TV comedy. And
Yeah.
that's just it. We thought there should be a book about it. Well, there's books about the Dick Van Dyke Show. There's
Right.
books about I Love Lucy. Why is there no book about McHale's Navy?
Right. And one could argue the black and white thing, but all those shows you're mentioning were in black and white and are in
Oh
black
yeah,
and white and still are in black and white. So,
yeah.
um, the only other offensive
Do
thing
as
is, oh, go
as
ahead.
as more shows that they're producing now are going into syndication. A lot of the older shows are getting pushed out, and nothing against Seinfeld. I think it's a great show, but you've got your Seinfeld, and then Tim Allen show, the last
Mhm.
one. Mentioned Young Sheldon is in syndication already.
Yeah.
They push the old classic shows out.
Yeah. I guess they say that, because I used to say this once something came out on DVD, it was like in the DVD graveyard. You know, Fortunately, there's been streaming stations and things like that that have kind of revived certain shows and things like that, and they continue to do so. So I'm kind of happy about that. That it's not.
I like Me TV, but I don't know about you guys if you watch much of it or not. But it seems like they haven't changed their schedule in years.
Yeah. Well, in
It's just
recent times, I think they've been focusing on that new cartoon station, which
Oh
is
yeah.
now launched. So maybe that's why everything kind of slowed to a crawl, and let's not get any more shows right now.
Did you know that in 1974 they almost had a McHale's Navy cartoon?
didn't know
Hmm.
that.
Yeah, at the time that they did the Star Trek cartoon, and then they around that same time did I Dream of Jeannie, Partridge Family, and various other former live action shows. So Gilligan's Island, Gilligan's Planet, and those things. They were working on a McHale's Navy cartoon that supposedly would have had some of the original cast doing the voices. Now, that was the year Flynn died, so probably not him because it was for that fall that it was supposed to be on.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, you would think not Conway either or Borgnine. So
Hmm.
I don't know. But either way, apparently it never got beyond the talking stages, even
Hmm.
though it was plugged in a couple of newspaper articles. So
Do you know which studio was planning it?
I'm thinking Filmation because they did
Hmm.
most of those, but I don't know
Right.
for sure. It's not mentioned in the Filmation book.
Hmm.
Uh, but again, I think they did almost all of the rest of those.
Yeah, because
Well, no,
I
I think Hanna-Barbera did Partridge
Hanna-Barbera
Family.
did a few, and DePatie Freeling did a few, and but very few. But they did the Oddball Couple and stuff like that. I did the DePatie Freeling books, so
I know
I
you did. I love that one. That was a
thank
good one.
you.
I think that was my
Um,
first book I bought of yours.
Thank you. And things, I still find little things of unproduced stuff. Well, I made amends on one of them. I have a recent book about Mad Magazine. Well, after I did the DePatie Freeling book, I found out that they were planning to do a Captain Klutz Don Martin
Oh,
cartoon at some point. And I didn't say that in the original DePatie Freeling book, but I did say it in the Mad book. So there we go. But it seems
my
like there's
review on
always
your
like
Mad,
little projects that may have happened and, just
yeah,
fell through the wayside.
my my review on your Mad book should go up this weekend.
Oh, cool. All right. Thank
I
you very
finished it
much.
the other day.
Okay.
Well, don't thank me yet. You don't know if I
All
liked
right.
it.
Oh. Are you one of these people that said, the book came damaged in the mail from Amazon?
Oh, I
One
hate that.
star. Yeah.
We had that on Amazon for the McHale book.
Oh,
It
really?
arrived
Oh,
with
God.
the cover split, so they gave it 1 star.
Uh, don't
Like,
you hate
what?
it?
Yes. And there's nothing you can do about it. You'll never get back that perfect rating
No.
because of that 1 star. Even
Right.
if they take that review down,
Yeah.
they don't take the star away.
Right. Ugh, frustrates me. I know what it's like. Um, one last thing I was going to say about this book. Well, you kind of touched on it, but did they ever consider doing a fifth season with or without Borgnine? To your knowledge.
I don't think so. I think it was over. I think that was Yeah, I don't think they did.
Okay.
Yeah. I think if they were going to continue it, it would have continued it as a movie. And as we said before, they had already decided after the diminishing returns that they weren't going to continue it as a movie.
Okay.
So Flynn was just being hopeful.
Yeah. And then on the later movie with Tom Arnold, I mean, had that. Well, that wasn't that bad of a flop. I mean, it was
I liked it.
modest.
I
Yeah.
thought it was good. I
But I
thought
mean,
Tom Arnold was
financially, I
really
mean,
good.
yeah. Didn't it do well financially, at least decently?
It did better than some of the TV related movies like Starsky and Hutch and things like that. But
Mm.
I
You
don't
would
think
have
it did
thought
amazing.
you would have thought that maybe it would have been at that time in 1997 that maybe it would have renewed interest in a series, but I don't think
Yeah,
it did.
no, it did not. And again, Borgnine's in the movie. He wasn't
Yeah.
even in the second original movie, but he's in this one.
Which I find interesting and ironic, Maybe he
But
felt
I thought it
guilty.
was a
It's like I
marvelous
wasn't
film.
in the other film, but there's differing stories on that too. You talk about it in the book,
And
that
Steve can tell you too, Mark. We almost had Tom Arnold to write the forward for this, but then he just kept putting us off, and we finally
oh,
had to go another route.
Yeah, we exchanged a few emails with him. Very nice guy. But he finally asked me exactly, just tell me exactly what you'd like and I'll get it to you. But he never did.
okay.
So,
Well, if
but
he
then we
ever
got
does,
Carl
you could do
Valentine's
a
daughter.
second printing. You can revise your edition.
I'm kind of glad he didn't, because that way we were able to get Sarah Valentine,
Yes.
Mhm.
Carl's daughter.
Oh yeah, yeah,
She wrote a wonderful book.
that's true.
And
All
she
right.
loved the book too. Happy to hear that.
And I enjoyed it too. I mean, I liked how you broke it down, and it's very easy to read. You go episode by episode, and very thorough, lots of good photos and things like that. So kudos to both of you for the excellent,
Thank you.
excellent job. I should do a
Yeah.
review and not give it a 1 star. I'll give it a 5 to
Yes, that
boost
would be nice.
boost your
Thank you.
ratings back up. All right. Well, I'll give you the spotlight here. You can each take turns and say how you can get in contact if people want to talk to you about McHale's Navy or anything, uh, and where you get the book. So, Denny, go first.
Well, I'm on Facebook, of course. I think that's how you found me. And we have a page, Set Sail with McHale. Everybody can like and follow the interesting details we put on there. Of course, my email, I think you mentioned it earlier, didn't you? WonderMag2003 at yahoo.com. It's on Amazon. You can order it from Bear Manor Media. And also, I want to give them a plug, because that little publisher, they're putting out some pretty good books that wouldn't get published anywhere else. It wasn't for them.
And Steve?
I was impressed that if you actually look up the book on Google, it's available via the websites, at least, probably not in store, because most Bear Manor books aren't. When I managed the store at bookstore at the airport, I made a point of carrying Bear Manor books, but most bookstores don't. But I was impressed looking it up in Google that it's available in Indonesia, it's available in Australia. McHale's Navy was huge in Australia. It's available all over the world from the various websites, not in different languages as far as I know. But I was impressed with that. But yeah, the best way to get a hold of either of us is via the Set Sail with McHale Facebook page, which is kind of set up to be sort of like DVD extras to the book itself. So it deals with all the different actors. It deals with the occasionally one of the episodes, the series itself, the behind the scenes people, and just gives you a lot more information than we had room for in the book itself. So that would be a place to get a hold of us for there. As far as me, otherwise, I've got a dozen blogs, one of which is still active. The rest of them are still up, but for people to read with like thousands of different posts over the years. And yeah, and Denny is working on a new book that sounds fascinating.
Can you disclose it, Denny?
I sure can. It's we're going to go to the apes on this one, because it's called Monkeying Around. It's a history of primates in film and television. So there's been a
that
lot
sounds
more
So
TV shows.
not just Planet of the Apes, it's everything.
No, we're talking about real monkeys.
Okay. Very
Yeah.
cool.
Well,
Me.
there's a
Planet of the
great
Apes
new
was the intro.
there's a great new two volume book out about Planet of the Apes from Bear Manor by someone else. So yeah, you'll
Okay.
probably not do too much about the Planet of the Apes and just do everything else.
That may be, I don't think that's a drawback, but I mean, sometimes you get an idea for a book, and, there may already be one out by Bear Manor, which
Yeah.
no one else will have one out.
Yeah. But it is kind of fun doing a book that nobody else has done. So, I'm sure you had fun doing it because
Yeah.
we're the first. So, Steve, are you
I
working on
suppose
any? Oh, go
you could
ahead.
write a book about the Andy Griffith Show, but look how many books are out about the Andy
Yeah.
Griffith Show. What would you say that had not been said before?
Yeah. There's even a book about the Mayberry RFD, so I have it. That's why I know. So,
Didn't know
yeah, yeah. But yeah, there's more
that.
on Andy
Actually,
Griffith's show. So yeah. Steve, are
The
you working on anything else? I know you had that other book. You can give a quick plug for it, the one for Land of the Lost.
yeah, what's it called? Run, Holly, Run. No, I've got about 12 books that I have written parts of, and then another half dozen or so that I ghost wrote over the years that I can't just divulge that I actually
That's
wrote.
okay.
And but that's fun. As long as you don't have the ego that you need to tell somebody, that's fun to do that.
Mhm.
But currently I am editing the fourth book in Martin Graham's Lone Ranger history.
Oh, wow.
The first two volumes are already out,
Mm.
and I just edited the third, and the fourth will be the final one, I think, in the series.
Mhm.
And I've got about another 100 pages to go on that. And then I've got two projects that I am hoping to work on. One is a look at the humor in Blazing Saddles
Mm.
called Saddle Sores. Um, and because all these people on YouTube react to Blazing Saddles and miss most of the jokes.
Right.
All they react to is the shock stuff,
Yeah.
and they miss most of the actual jokes. What I want to make is something they can sit next to them on the couch so that if they're watching the movie, flip to that scene and say, "Oh, so that's what that means."
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
The
I
Laurel
know
and
they
Hardy
say if you
handshake and things like that.
exactly, nobody gets that. But they always say if you have to explain a joke, it isn't funny, but it is funny in Mel Brooks movies.
Yeah.
And the other one I've been working on for a couple of years is the films of Dick Van Dyke.
Hmm.
Everybody knows Dick Van Dyke as a television star, but he made 13 movies as the star.
Hmm.
And of those 13 movies, a number of them are really, really good.
Hmm.
And yet nobody ever thinks of him as a film star.
Mhm.
If you look at Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, it was written by Ian Fleming.
Mhm.
It was the script was done by Roald Dahl, who had just written You Only Live Twice. The
Mhm.
villain is played by Gert Frobe, who
Mhm.
played Goldfinger. The female character has a suggestive name, Truly Scrumptious, and there's a cool car with lots of weapons on it. Dick Van Dyke plays James Bond for
Yes.
kids.
I've known that for years. Yes.
That's a cool thing. People should write about that. So yeah, I'm working on that, and I've already checked. Tom Richmond already has a Dick Van Dyke movie caricature
Cool. And it has a
for my
and it
possible
has a
cover.
catchy theme song like a James Bond film too.
There's a
Yes,
Dick Van Dyke
exactly.
film from 1969 that is probably my favorite, and you never see it anymore. It used to be on television quite a bit. It's called The Comic.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Very good film.
Mm-hmm.
My first date was Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, though. We were 10 years old. And yeah, and I'm still in touch with her on Facebook. And every once in a while, we reminisce about going to see the movie at the Liberty Theater in Covington, Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
It was the first time either of us were allowed to go by ourselves to a movie. So, and the little neighbor kid followed us, and we had to hide from him the whole day.
My chitty story is I probably saw it on television in the early 70s. And since I was probably a lot younger than you at the time, like 3 or 4, the child catcher creeped
Oh, it
me
was
out,
creepy.
so I'm like, ah.
Yes. We know Benny Hill's in there too.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I've heard
So
stories from Dick Van Dyke that he's very quiet and reserved and off to
yeah.
the side by himself and not really social. So he wasn't anything like he was on his TV shows or anything like
What
that.
stands out to me about that movie is the song. It stuck
Yeah.
in my head when I first heard it.
And Anyway, we really digressed here. So. Did
Well, no, we're
McHale's
talking
Navy make
about
any appearances in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang? No. Anyway. Anyway, so it was a pleasure having you both on the show, and
thank you for having us.
thank
Yeah,
you.
it's been good being here.
And I look forward to any future work. And we'll just give one last plug since we could. The book again is called Set Sail with McHale, and it's written by Denny Reese and Stephen Thompson, I think. Yeah. I was just
Yes.
seeing what it said down there. And like we said on the top of the show, great cover by Tom Richmond. That's enough to get you to buy it, isn't it? Yeah. So, but yeah. And, if
It
so
ties in
inclined,
with you, doesn't it? It ties
yes.
in with you because of the Mad.
Oh, yeah.
I forgot about that.
Yep.
Tom Richmond.
Yeah, I've
Weird
interviewed
Mad.
Richmond many times. I interviewed him for my crack book because he was a crack too. So,
Oh, he's a great guy. He is a
yeah,
great guy. He loved the book too. I
yeah.
sent him a free copy of it when we got it. One of my free copies from Bear Manor, I sent directly to him.
Hmm. And well, here's something. If you ever do a Married with Children book, he used to do the Married with Children comic book, so you could have double duty on that. But that's another story for another time. Anyway, all right.
I thought those comic books were funnier than the show.
Yes. So, Stephen, Denny, thank you again for being on the show. That wraps it up for another Fun Ideas podcast, and we will see you next time. This is Mark Arnold, your host.
Thank you for listening, and thank you, Denny Reese and Steve Thompson, for being my special guests. Remember, you can always watch the video version of this episode on YouTube. Episode number 273 will be coming soon. If you would like to comment and or be a guest on this podcast, please drop me a line at funideas.mark@gmail.com. Become a free subscriber or a paying Patreon at Mark Arnold Fun Ideas Productions. If everyone listening just contributed $1 a month, it would be a tremendous help in continuing the production of my books and this podcast. The opening and closing music for this podcast is provided by Elmo and Elmo. This has been the Fun Ideas Podcast. This has been Mark Arnold speaking. This episode is copyright 2024 Fun Ideas Productions. Thank you and good night.
If you're unhappy most of the time, and you're indoors when the sun begins to shine, you're bogged down with responsibility.